part of the cloud.
Yeah.
Chairs.
What was the vote for chairs?
Chairs is go ahead.
You
want
was
colors?
colors? Or C was the.
If you want color, talk to Scott.
The one,
I stay out of those
the
details.
gray one, with, it's the gray and the green are the same chairs, the green one is the gray one with arms.
Oh,
We
okay.
chose to get 25 of
I'll
those,
move up.
5 of them.
That looks still.
Color scheme and all. We're also
Coming out today.
in conversation.
No.
We're also in conversation with the provost and others, and Scott's gonna head this up to get rid of all this stuff here. We've got stuff here back from the eighties, I think, and we're getting rid of all that, and we're gonna actually flip
1980s.
the room, yeah, flip the
That's
room
round.
so that the front of the room is up there, the speaker will be up there, and we'll be facing this way. I think it gives us more room and we'll feel a little more comfortable. Also, you won't have the glare behind you. So with that, Scott, take it away.
Yeah, the chair that we're gonna get is the green chair, that, just remember, it's not gonna be green. Right, and it's the color of the chair without the arms, but we'll have arms
And no wheels.
and no wheels.
No wheels.
We had to turn down the 8-track stereo in it too. We said that. Good afternoon, and welcome to our 4th speaker of the spring. Today, we welcome a New York State senior librarian, Elizabeth Jakubowski, who specializes in the New York State Library's Tasting History Project. This project is part of the extensive scope of the New York State Library's wide range of programs and seeks to identify and share recipes made using materials found in the New York State Library's collections. Actually, the recipes, they're not the actual food. Various periods of history are highlighted, including all the way back to the 18th century and especially World War I. Elizabeth received her BA in history from SUNY New Paltz and her MS in information science with a concentration in archives and records administration from UAlbany. So she's a great Dane. I first became aware of Elizabeth and this program while listening to a podcast called A New York Minute in History on WAMC. It's essentially a monthly program covering various fascinating segments of the New York State culture and history, and illuminating the story behind many of the William G. Pomeroy Foundation's markers all over New York State and beyond. Ms. Jakubowski has shared several recipes from the library's collection, and there are copies of those recipes. Includes a flour pudding from 1796, which Elizabeth labels a challenge, an applesauce salad from the 50s, a cherry marshmallow pie and coconut crust also from the 50s, and Lucretia's spinach dip from the 90s. Many of us had that, I'm sure. And my wife has made 2 examples of heritage concoctions for our tasting. We have a 1920s ginger ale jello salad and a Depression era peanut butter bread to try at your own risk. But let's just say I gave her recipes for a test drive of the Heritage Delights, and they weren't exactly from a James Beard cookbook. Without further ado, and without hearing any more of me, let's listen to Elizabeth.
Thank you all for coming out on such a beautiful afternoon. Pardon my sitting, I just have a back injury. Yeah. All right, well, good afternoon. Like I said, I'm excited to be here and to talk about the New York State Library's Tasting History Project with all of you. As Scott said, I received my bachelor's from SUNY New Paltz and my master's from UAlbany. I've been lucky enough to have been a children's and young adult librarian in the Capital Region, and then I was an adult services librarian out in Rochester, New York. I moved back to Albany and started working at the New York State Library in the Manuscripts and Special Collections Unit in 2019. I really found my home at the State Library. I couldn't ask for better colleagues and collaborators. Our collections amaze me, and I get to learn something new every day. One last thing, I just want to point out before we begin, I am not a chef and I'm not a food historian. I am a librarian who loves history and snacks, and I'm really lucky to work with other information professionals who share those same interests. So how did this whole thing begin? In 2021, I was in our rare books room and two titles happened to catch my eye. Pulling them off the shelf and looking through them, I noticed both books featured sugarless recipes and had other substitution recipes. Based on their titles, I thought they were from World War II because I think of that war when I think of wartime cooking. But then I noticed they were both published in 1918. These books were Mary Elizabeth's Wartime Recipes and Amelia Doddridge's Liberty Recipes. As I dove into the history of these two books, I shared my enthusiasm with my colleagues. Matt, a fellow librarian in manuscripts, and Jamie, an archivist in the New York State Archives, were both interested in the cookbooks too. We decided that each of us would choose a recipe to make and then bring it in for all of us to try. We thought it would be a fun way to experience these recipes rather than simply read about them. So the first recipe was the one I chose, stuffed peach salad. This salad is made by combining cottage cheese and salted pecans and then putting a scoop of that mixture into half of a peeled and pitted peach. You need to top that with a vinaigrette dressing, which was called a French dressing at the time, but it's not that orange stuff we all know and love. A small dab of mayonnaise, which we kept optional, and a sprinkle of paprika to serve. We had a real good time trying this recipe. There were lots of leftovers because I cannot help but prep enough food to feed an actual army. But I'm really glad it worked out that way because two more colleagues offered to join in based on our very clear excitement and offers of snacks. So this is Matt and his reaction to the stuffed peach salad. The texture was really off because everything was mushy except for the nuts. I used canned peaches, so those were mushy. The cottage cheese was mushy. The taste really wasn't that bad, but the texture was really off-putting. In fact, the recipe specifically said because they were conserving dairy, not to use cream cheese. To use cottage cheese. So I did make a few with cream cheese, and I'm gonna say if you're gonna make that, cream cheese. That's the way to go. So I'm on the New York State Library social media team. So with all of the participants agreeing, I was able to share the cookbooks, the recipes, the end results, and Matt's face with a wider audience. This was a chance to welcome folks to approach our collections in a new and fun way. Recipes are reflections of the people who create them and the time periods in which they lived. When someone writes a cookbook, they're drawing on their own experiences for what they've eaten and enjoyed, and also what ingredients and cooking techniques they have available to them. So when you make a historical recipe, you're actually able to take a moment and walk through that author's life, to think about and experience a little bit about what it might have been like for them to prepare the recipe, and then you get to taste the end results. So let's take a deeper dive into tasting history. In April 1917, the United States entered World War I. The US had taken a stance of neutrality since the war had broken out in 1914. However, events in early 1917 caused President Woodrow Wilson to go before Congress and ask for a declaration of war against Germany. The US needed to quickly boost the numbers of men in the military. At that point, the Army had fewer than 300,000 troops. In May 1917, Congress passed the Selective Service Act. So between the draft and volunteers, the military grew quickly and ended the war with more than 4.5 million members. And as the saying goes, an army marches on its stomach. In August 1917, President Wilson signed Executive Order 2679-A, establishing an independent federal agency called the United States Food Administration. He appointed Herbert Hoover to lead the agency in the role of food administrator. Some of the many areas of oversight for the administration were fixing food prices, encouraging farmers to produce more crops, and urging American households to voluntarily help conserve food and grow Liberty Gardens. Hoover stated, quote, "The effectiveness of these rules is dependent solely upon the goodwill of and the willingness to sacrifice by the American people. We have but one police force, the American woman, and we depend on her to organize in cooperation with our state and local food administrators to see that these rules are obeyed by that small minority who may fail. The administration created many posters and slogans calling on households to participate in meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays. Thursdays and Saturdays would be porkless. All of this was in an effort to have enough food to feed the military and to help civilians in allied countries desperately in need of food supplies. Born in Syracuse, New York in 1884, Mary Elizabeth Evans faced loss early on in her life. Her father passed away when she was 12 and her grandfather the following year. Though her family had social influence, they needed an income. So to do her part, Mary Elizabeth went to work, and in 1900, at age 15, she opened a candy making company. Her delicious sweets and business acumen allowed her company to grow quickly, and in 1913, she opened Mary Elizabeth Limited of New York, headquartered on Fifth Avenue in New York City, opening stores and tea rooms in Boston and Newport too. That's an image of the Fifth Avenue location. When the US entered the war, Mary Elizabeth, now a successful businesswoman, took it upon herself to meet with Herbert Hoover and hear directly from him what was needed from the Food Administration. So Mary Elizabeth was a big supporter of the Food Administration. She was quoted in the New York Times stating, "Certainly we ought to do as the Food Administration asks, even if it does cause hardship now and then. What every individual woman ought to learn is that she can do her biggest service right in her own home." Mary Elizabeth used her stores and tea rooms to test her sugarless sweet recipes using substitutes such as honey, corn syrup, maple syrup, and fruit instead of cane and beet sugar. So not really sugarless the way we might think today. She also tested wheatless recipes in her tea rooms. Mary Elizabeth published her wartime recipe cookbook in 1918, sharing recipes she had tested in her stores. She included many candy recipes as well as ideas for meals and baked goods. Baked apple stuffed with sweet potatoes is one of her meatless recipes. This was really good. The sweet potatoes and the apples go very well together. You could really use this as a side dish at dinner, or you could sweeten it up and it would make a nice dessert. Matt giving it a big thumbs up down there, as did the rest of us. This one was definitely a success. Amelia Doddridge was born in Vincennes, Indiana in 1884. Her father was a minister and her mother was a homemaker. Amelia was academic minded and went on to earn a bachelor's degree in home economics. At the time her cookbook was published in 1918, she was head of the home economics department in Worcester College in Ohio and an emergency city home demonstration agent in Delaware. As a food demonstrator, Amelia would share her cooking tips and conservation techniques in Liberty kitchens like this one pictured in her cookbook. She would also travel, bringing her demonstrations to homemakers. Amelia was quoted in May of 1918 stating, "There is a way in which all who eat can help to win the war. Just now, wheat is, without a doubt, the foodstuff by means of which America can do the most to help the boys at the front. By taking care and selecting the right foods to eat, one may easily become a wheat patriot." Her cookbook included many slogans pictured here. My absolute favorite is "Be a cheese patriot, join the ranks and cheese the Kaiser." I'm also a fan of "Husband your stuff, don't stuff your husband." This was one of Amelia's recipes, baked hominy with cheese. It was a little salty, but it was good overall. With a few tweaks, all of us who tried it said we would have it again, especially if we included something like a sauteed vegetable, just to break up the salt. You can see Matt's lovely reaction. One last thing about Amelia. She continued to work as a home economics teacher throughout her life. Before she passed away, she donated a large and varied button collection to the Wayne County Historical Museum in Indiana. And if you are ever out that way, it's still in their collections. I actually reached out to the museum to see if it still existed, and it does. Just warmed my little historian heart. All right, so next we step into the 1930s. For this series, we explored recipes found in the New York State Archives collections, which was a bit of a surprise. They specifically came from Federal Writers Project records. So in the 1930s in America, these times were defined by the Great Depression, a period of severe economic hardship following the stock market crash of 1929. Unemployment soared to 25%, businesses collapsed, and millions of families struggled to afford necessities. Banks failed across the country, wiping out savings, while drought and dust storms devastated farms in the Dust Bowl, forcing many to migrate in search of work. Amid the crisis, the government, under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, launched the New Deal in 1933, and introducing programs like the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, to provide jobs and economic relief. The Federal Writers Project, or FWP, was a WPA program launched in 1935 to provide employment for out-of-work writers. The initiative hired an estimated 10,000 people and produced hundreds of publications, including state and city guides, local histories, oral histories, and ethnographies. In addition to writers, this project also created jobs for unemployed librarians, historians, and editors. This image shown here is a photograph of an FWP library. This one was located in California, but similar libraries would have existed in New York as well. Here you can see a FWP printing press operation. And the lady on the left is attending a book sale for FWP publications, and on the right is a gentleman working as an FWP bookbinder. So the Federal Writers Project materials held by the State Archives is part of Record Series A0551, and there is a finding aid available online if you're interested. Research material was collected in preparation for publishing travel and tourism guides to New York State and local communities. There are records relating to the State Almanac and State Encyclopedia, and there were additional publications on a variety of topics, including health, wildlife, agriculture, and food. So the recipes we used were gathered for potential inclusion in a State Almanac, which I have been led to believe didn't actually come to fruition. The recipes in the series were not written by one specific author. Rather, they were gathered by FWP researchers from community members around the state. The image on the left is of researchers in their office, and on the right is an example of a home kitchen in the 1930s. The format of the records varies somewhat. Most pages are typewritten. Some reference the location where the recipes came from, such as Chemung County. Others include the name of the FWP researchers, and then some are handwritten. During the Great Depression, home cooks faced severe food shortages, limited budgets, rationing as families struggled to afford basic ingredients. Many relied on cheap, filling staples like beans, potatoes, breads, stretching meals as far as possible. Creative substitutions became essential, and ingredients like butter, sugar, and eggs were used sparingly. Government programs such as relief gardens and food assistance helped some families, while cookbooks and newspapers shared budget-friendly recipes to make the most of what was available. Despite the hardships, home cooks demonstrated resilience, resourcefulness, and ingenuity in feeding their families. This is a recipe for applesauce cake. It's a good example of a very simple recipe. It only uses a few ingredients, all pantry staples, but you'll notice it does assume some pre-existing knowledge, specifically about cooking times and temperatures. You can also see that no measurements are given for the flour used in the recipe. You are instructed to add flour until the batter is the consistency of honey. Nevertheless, the chef who made this did a fabulous job. This one was absolutely delicious, and I would definitely recommend making it. It was really good. You can see now Matt's stepped up. He's got flowers. All right, so now we're going to travel forward in time again. We're moving on to the 50s. In the 1950s, American home cooks embraced convenience and efficiency as modern appliances like refrigerators, freezers, and electric stoves became more common in kitchens. The post-war boom led to an increase in focus on family meals, with many households adopting time-saving recipes and prepackaged foods like TV dinners and instant cake mixes. Cooks also enjoyed experimenting with international flavors as American cuisine became more diverse. The era also saw the rise of women not just as homemakers, but also as home entertainers, with cookbooks, magazines, and television shows offering guidance on everything from dinner parties to holiday feasts.
And jewelry.
Oh, very much so. And Avon. Despite the growing convenience, there was still a cultural emphasis on home-cooked hearty meals for the families. So for the 1950s, I went into the New York State Library's main research collection and settled on these 4 titles. There was lots to choose from. Our collection has a great amount of cookbooks in it. So these include the Antoinette Pope School Cookbook, the Complete Hors d'oeuvre Cookbook, So Easy Recipes and So Good Too, and the Summer Cookbook. All right, so Antoinette Pope may no longer be a household name, but there was a time in the 50s and 60s when it certainly was. Of course, most people are really familiar with Julia Child and her 1961 book, Mastering the Art of French Cooking. Between her books and, of course, her TV show starting in 1962, she would truly revolutionize home cooking and make fine cuisine much more accessible for the everyday person. But before Julia, there was Antoinette. Antoinette Pope was a celebrated chef and cookbook author known for her influence on mid-century cooking. She was born in Italy in 1897 and came to America as a child. She married her husband, Francois, in 1920. Antoinette gained fame in the 40s and 50s as a popular culinary expert, particularly for her work in the Chicago area, where she ran a renowned cooking school. Her teaching style was approachable, aiming to make gourmet cooking accessible to home cooks. She and Francois would go on to host a television show that featured them and their 2 sons. It was called Creative Cookery, and it aired daily from 1951 to 1963. The Popes also published numerous cookbooks, but the most popular of which was the Antoinette Pope School Cookbook. It featured a range of recipes, many of which reflect mid-century American culinary trends. This includes things like convenience ingredients, processed foods, which would become more common at the time, things like hot dogs and cheese whiz. So this is an example of a contemporary advertisement unrelated to the book, but it's a good example of brand marketing of processed foods in the 1950s. This is obviously an ad for Velveeta, which even then could not be called cheese. It's labeled as a pasteurized processed cheese food. It also includes healthy recipes at the bottom. You can judge how healthy they are. So speaking of cheese, this was an Antoinette Pope recipe for cheese carrots. Toasted and buttered slices of bread with cheese shaped into carrots on top. It was a wow factor. These were absolutely delicious though. The chef who made them used an herbed butter, which really packed a flavored punch. She did say, while these did have a beautiful payoff and did taste good, if she were to make this again, she's just going to spread the cheese on top and not sculpt. It took hours. The Complete Hors d'oeuvre Cookbook was a 1958 publication that specifically focused on entertaining. It was written by 2 women, Alice Shriver and Francine Wallace. In an interview written at the time of publication, it referred to them as 2 suburban housewives. And the informal term that they used to describe hors d'oeuvres was snack cookery. The book is formatted in an interesting way. They give their reader a base recipe and then several variations follow. And you can see that in the meatball recipe there on the left. The base recipe is at the top, and then I believe there's 5 options underneath. This book also included a chapter called From Other Lands. The authors did their best to offer recipes that, in their words, quote, retain their native taste and combinations, but many of the recipes are very Americanized and oversimplified. But they advocate for including these international recipes, claiming that the dishes will, quote, lead to conversation about the countries of their origin, so be sure to have the encyclopedia handy. So I do love that. One of the authors, Alice Schreiber, would go on to publish additional cookbooks up through the 1980s, several of which focused exclusively on international recipes. Oh, this cookbook. The National Canners Association, or NCA, was a trade organization founded in 1907 to represent the interests of the canning industry in the United States. It played a key role in promoting the use of canned foods, particularly during times of war and economic hardship. The association was instrumental in advocating for safety, quality, and the convenience of canned foods. One of the NCA's notable contributions to society was the publication of their cookbook, So Easy Recipes and So Good Too, first released in the 1950s. This cookbook was designed to showcase the versatility and convenience of canned foods, offering recipes that made use of canned vegetables, fruits, meats, and soups. It was aimed at busy home cooks looking for quick meal ideas, helping to reinforce the idea of canned goods as an essential and time-saving component in American kitchens. You'll find out later the beef I have with this particular cookbook. All right, so lastly, the Summer Cookbook. It was published in 1954 by Marion Clyde McCarroll, and it's a seasonal collection of recipes focused on light, fresh, and easy meals for the summer months. Marion was widely known as a writer and journalist in the first half of the 20th century. In the 1920s, Marion became the first woman issued a press pass by the New York Stock Exchange. She also served as the women's editor at the New York Evening Post, now the New York Post. Marion might be best known for her syndicated column called Advice to the Lovelorn that she wrote for 21 years. Marion's cookbook emphasizes the use of seasonal fruits and vegetables, offering a variety of dishes that reflect the ease and enjoyment of summer cooking. The recipes cater to both the casual outdoor gatherings and more formal occasions, highlighting convenience of grilled, chilled dishes, and simple, flavorful ingredients. So cherry marshmallow pie in coconut crust was one of hers, and this is absolutely lovely. This is delightful. I think it is the most universally loved recipe we have ever made on Tasting History. You can see my taste tester, Jamie, just going in for it. If I had to give it one critique, it's a little sweet. I don't think it needs the marshmallows, but that coconut butter crust on a pecan or on a pumpkin pie, changing their Thanksgiving menu. I'm telling you, it's delicious. All right. So jumping back in time, following the end of the American Revolution, the United States was struggling to find its own identity. Culinary historians Keith Stavely and Kathleen Fitzgerald have written that in the early years of the Republic, Americans were engaged in a lively debate over their identity. With freedom from Britain and the establishment of a Republican government came a need to assert a distinctly American way of life. In the words of 20th century scholar Mary Tulford Wilson, a certain slight cookbook can be read as, quote, another declaration of American independence. So what was this slight cookbook? The full title is American Cookery, or the Art of Dressing Viands, Fish, Poultry, and Vegetables, and the Best Modes of Making Pastes, Puffs, Pies, Tarts, Puddings, Custards, and Preserves, and all kinds of cakes, from the imperial plum to the plain cake, adapted to this country in all grades of life by Amelia Simmons, an American orphan. I've never done that in one breath. Whew. American Cookery is widely acknowledged as the first cookbook published by an American in America for an American audience. The New York State Library's copy of this work is a second edition. It's published in 1796 by Charles R. and George Webster of Albany, New York. It has also been digitized and is available in our digital collections. The original lives in our vault. This cookbook manages to cram a wide range of recipes into its 64 pages. Of course, the brevity of most of those recipes helps with that. Amelia was writing for women familiar with the basics of cooking. There was an assumption that this book would assist the cook and not provide step-by-step instructions like modern cookbooks and recipes do. Not much is known about the author, other than what she says about herself in the title and the preface of the book. Amelia calls herself an orphan and says that, quote, the orphan, though left to the care of virtuous guardians, will find it essentially necessary to have an opinion and determination of her own, Those words signaled to me that Amelia knew she needed to look out for herself. That attitude may have been what drove her to create her cookbook, drawing on her background as a domestic servant. For a long time, historians thought that because the first edition of American Cookery, also published in 1796, was published in Hartford, that Amelia must have been from Connecticut. But culinary historian Karen Hess has a different theory. She states that a case can be made for her, Amelia, being from the Hudson River Valley. The second edition is from 1796, is from Albany. The third, 1804, is from Salem, New York, and Albany. The 1808 edition is from Troy. The 1815 edition is from Poughkeepsie, and the 1822 edition is from New York. It is to be remarked that they are all on the Hudson River or near it. Some firsts in American cookery. American Cookery is the first known cookbook to include many North American ingredients, such as corn and cornmeal. It uses American terms for foods like molasses instead of the British term treacle. It also features the first known recipe for stuffed roast turkey with cranberry sauce. Another first is the use of pearl ash. To get baked goods to rise, cooks had either had to beat air into the ingredients or use yeast. Pearl ash, or potassium carbonate, reacts with liquids like water, sour milk, and fruit juice to create carbon dioxide, providing lift. Amelia uses it in a few recipes, including one of her gingerbread recipes. American Cookery is the first cookbook to use the word cookie, which comes from the Dutch word koekje. There's also a coleslaw recipe called slaw, and that comes from the Dutch words kool and slaw, which mean cabbage salad. American Cookery is also credited as having the first cupcake recipe. It's not called cupcakes, it's called a light cake to bake in small cups, because we can tell by the title, she really loves them long. Karen Hess cites the use of Dutch terms and pearl ash as further evidence of Amelia as being a New York gal. As we know, the land that is New York has close ties with Dutch culture, and Hess says that there was a particularly active production of pot ash, which is another word for pearl ash, in the Albany area in the late colonial times. In 2012, the Library of Congress named American Cookery as one of the 88 books that shaped America. They cite the fact that it's the first cookbook authored by an American, published in America, and that it contains the other firsts that I've listed, particularly pearl ash and the inclusion of North American ingredients. There's that flour pudding you mentioned, Scott. It really may not look good, but I think you can tell from Tom's face, retired state archivist Tom, that it was absolutely delicious. It's a pudding and it tastes like, do you ever have Cinnamon Life cereal?
Yeah. It's
It's just cinnamony and sweet. It was heaven, but yeah, those are all of the instructions you get. That's it. So for our latest recipe series, I wanted to showcase the genealogy research that many people undertake at the State Library and the State Archives. Our collections provide access to government records, church records, personal papers, city directories, newspapers, and a whole lot more. For this series, I asked participants to explore their own family histories. I gave them a lot of leeway. They could dive into the distant past of their family tree and find recipes related to their cultural heritage, or they could share a recipe they grew up eating. I asked them to provide me with a recipe and a story, a very short story as to why they chose that recipe. So the results were all over the map, but it kind of made this series a lot of fun. I picked just a few to highlight. So this recipe came from Caroline and is for a traditional French-Canadian meat pie called a tourtière. Caroline's mom was, quote, born in Quebec, Canada, and has been eating this pie her entire life. My mother's family was not wealthy by any means, so a tourtière, which contains simple and somewhat cheap ingredients, was a staple recipe. As you can see, taste tester Josh barely looked up to give this a thumbs up before going back for more. My taste tester pool has grown since Matthew. So Sharon brought in this one. It's called Grace Phillips Pickles. According to Sharon, this recipe came from my mother-in-law, Grace Phillips, who was an excellent cook and made all kinds of awesome dishes. I absolutely love pickles, so do I. And so I started making them for myself and my family, and I still make them and give them as gifts around the holidays. They are always a big hit. I think you can tell from Taste Tester Jesse's smile. He definitely agrees with that. These were absolutely delicious. The recipe is really interesting because you do start with a base of dill pickles, which you then put into a sweet pickle and let it sit. It becomes like a fridge pickle. I don't like sweet pickles. These were heaven. They really were. So Claire decided to share a recipe that she updated, and it's called Divorced Dad Has Kids on the Weekend Frozen Dessert. Oh, goodness. So Claire remembered that, quote, back in the 1970s, we kids spent every weekend in New York City with our dad. Haagen-Dazs vanilla ice cream with canned pears and syrup was his go-to dessert for us. She modified this version. It features cashew nice cream instead of dairy. Cold dessert, warm memories. Sharon's having a field day with this one. This one was very popular. Believe it or not, that cashew nice cream was really good. Some of the participants shared their original written recipes with me, including a page from a Betty Crocker cookbook, a handwritten index card, a recipe written on what looks like a scrap of paper, and a typewritten recipe out of a binder. Also shown here is a 1997 letter confirming the family name and spelling of a recipe. According to Heather, whose family this is from, quote, my recipe inspiration comes courtesy of my maternal grandmother, who prepared crepes for me and my sister when we were children. Graham was born in Maine and proudly came from a long line of French Canadians. In fact, French was her first language. For reasons unbeknownst to me, she always referred to any kind of crepe as crepe Suzette, aka the famous dessert that comes smothered in a flaming orange liqueur. Crepe Suzette was then shortened to Susie's. She most certainly was not serving us flambéed breakfast, but somehow the name stuck, and we lovingly will forever refer to crepes as Susie's. I love that story. So these recipes were actually shared on our social media, like I've said, but also collected together on our blog. So you can find them on our website if you're curious to see more, so you don't have to go scrolling back through our Instagram feed. All right, so if I could, I'm going to go a little off book, and I just want to share some of the more memorable recipes from across all of our tasting history series. People usually ask me what's the worst thing. We're calling them memorable because I would like it on record that my opinions of the following recipes are said with the deepest respect and gratitude to all of the chefs who've participated in this project. Lima bean croquettes from World War I. We dunked on this chef the whole time. She said she was going to pick these. We made fun of her. Nobody likes lima beans. These were delicious. There was not a scrap left of these. I don't know what it was. Perhaps having to push them through a sieve, they get rid of that outer shell. Could be that they were fried. She also made the savory sauce that's listed with the recipe, and also a mushroom sauce. The sauces were both delicious. The chef also happens to be British, so she knows her way around a croquette. There's Matt. You can see how happy he was. Like I said, there was not a scrap left.
He doesn't really have a happy face though,
Well,
does he?
he did this to himself. This was Matt's recipe from 1918. It was for a peanut roast. So it's one of those meatless recipes I mentioned where peanut butter takes the place of your protein. This was disgusting. It wasn't bad. It was just really, really dry. I didn't think tomato sauce had any place with peanut butter. If it didn't have that tomato sauce, I don't know how we would have swallowed it.
Okay.
Yeah, it was not good.
Memorable.
Memorable. So this is from the 30s, a cream of lettuce soup, which sounds boring. But when I tell you, this soup was delicious. First, I had to do a little bit of research and help the chef. We needed to know what sort of lettuce was popular in the 30s. It's iceberg. So again, makes it sound more boring. There's unsweetened whipped cream on top and crushed, what are those? Pistachios, thank you. And they added just the nicest bit of crunch. It was creamy, it was warm. That unsweetened whipped cream just sort of like melted in and just added to the creaminess. This was really good. This was also delicious. Back to Cinnamon Life cereal. Grandmother's old-fashioned cracker pudding. It was wonderful. It starts with saltines. There are raisins in there, definitely some cinnamon. I definitely recommend this one. The 30s knew what they were doing when it came to pudding. Okay, so the 50s. All right, so this is actually called the pineapple centerpiece, sorry. In-house, we've called it the meat pineapple. It looks atrocious, I'm not gonna lie. So you take a mason jar, you put it upside down, you then take Braunschweiger liver sausage and you shape it into a pineapple. You decorate it with sliced olives. There is a glaze on that. You lop the top off a perfectly good pineapple and put that on top, because why have a pineapple when you can have this? And then of course you serve it with Ritz crackers, the cracker of the 50s. It really didn't taste that bad. I know it looks atrocious. It tasted like liverwurst, if you've ever had a liverwurst sandwich. It really wasn't that bad, but the visual, it sticks with you. All right, these are olive turnovers. Sounds like a good idea. Unfortunately, green olives and Parmesan is a salt bomb. They just look like spring rolls. They look mild, and then you bit one and it was salt. Jamie, poor Jamie. We're bringing it back. I love this one. It deserves a second mention. I'm telling you, the only change you make is take out those marshmallows. It's delicious. Okay, so remember how I told you I had a beef with these So Easy recipes and So Good Too? They were not good. This is a So Easy recipe. It's actually one I shared with Scott in the hopes that he would make it, because there is something character building about eating a disgusting memorable historical recipe.
We do have a salad.
We do have a salad though. So the problem with this is, honestly, I don't really remember the flavor. It is the texture. So there's lime jello, a pound of applesauce, there's mayonnaise in there, olives, and pecans. The pecans got soggy overnight. The olives were rubbery. And then the jello never really set. So it was sort of, I don't know, it was like cottage cheese. It wasn't good. And that's my absolute favorite face Matt has ever made. Don't do this.
But it may be patience.
He is. That's why he became my taste tester early on. All right, so this one. I know I just talked a lot of crap about Jell-O, which is a New York invention, Leroy, New York. Excellent Jell-O museum. If you're ever out in the western part of New York, lived in Rochester, loved that museum. So this one, the cucumber salad mold, it has lime Jell-O, horseradish, vinegar, cucumbers, and I think there's some salt in there and some onions. I hate how good this was. The chef who made this told me I was gonna like it. I said, there's no way I'm gonna like it. It was wonderful. It wasn't just me either. We were all baffled. If you got a bite of everything, it tasted like summer. It was just cucumber, cool and fresh. If you only got the Jell-O, not so good. All right, so stepping back into the 18th century, this one's for pound cake. When you think about pound cake, I think we all think of vanilla, buttery deliciousness. Well, vanilla wasn't commercially available until the 1830s. So the flavoring of the time was usually rose water, which this one had, 1 gill of rose water. The texture was perfect. These were baked very well. It tasted like Chanel No. 5. So if you like perfumed bread,
How much was measured gill?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I should have written that down. I knew someone was going to ask me, but there are conversion charts available online.
Similar to a quart.
I thought,
Is it-
yeah.
it's about there.
What I think is the problem here is our rose water today is obviously probably more concentrated than their rose water was. So I just think it was too much if we had cut back, but you don't know until you taste it. Josh is suffering a little bit over there.
Elizabeth, what's a flow of it?
Yeah.
What's a flow of it? It says cook in a
Slow. It's the long S.
flow. Okay.
So it's a kind of oven you can reach your hand into. So this is called Indian slapjack. It's a cornmeal slapjack. Tom is also great at making face. The problem with this really wasn't the ingredients. so much. It was that they separate it. So it says use Indian meal or cornmeal. I think what they mean is corn flour, because what this thing did was it separated. So you had an eggy custard on top and then a dry cornmeal crust on the bottom. You can see it sort of in those pictures with Tom, his slice. It was not good. He's not exaggerating. Okay, cranberry tart with paste number 9. What I love about this is the recipe, which I would like to read to you. It says cranberries, stewed, strained, and sweetened, put into paste number 9, add spices till grateful, bake gently. I don't know exactly what that means. But it was delicious. It was a nice pop of color. The 18th century food all tended to be kind of brownish. The paste is on the side. Amelia had a list of different pastes that you could make, crusts. You can see Josh just emphatically giving that a thumbs up. And this one, our last one, is from Family History Recipes. It is for Kathy's German potato salad. I'm not a fan of German potato salad, and the chef who picked this one told me that he was going to convert me. And I was like, no way. This recipe is delicious. This was a tasting history first. Jolana, my taste tester, licked her plate clean. We haven't had anybody do that. It was really, really good. I can't recommend it enough. I was converted. So just to wrap up, exploring historical recipes is a unique way to connect with the past and experience the flavors of different eras. Whether it's a handwritten family favorite or a dish from an old cookbook, recreating these recipes brings history to life in your own kitchen. You might discover forgotten techniques, surprising ingredients, or even a new favorite meal. So why not sit back in time, gather your ingredients, and try making a historical recipe. Thank you guys so much. Did anyone have any questions, concerns? Every taste tester made it out alive.
This, is it available through New York State Archives, some of these recipes?
So all of the recipes except for one come from the state library.
Okay.
We're sisters. We all share the building with the museum. All of us are sisters. We're the oldest sister, just to point that one out. But so I listed the source of where each one of these came from. The World War I recipes are in manuscripts and special collections. The 1950s are in the main reference collection of the state library. The 30s was from the state archives. Amelia Simmons' American Cookery, like I said, is in our vault, but the book itself is available in our digital collections online, all 64 pages. You can look that book up through Google. Most places have the first edition, which is only 48 pages long. Amelia hated that edition. You can tell because in 1796, she has that published in Hartford, hates it, runs to Albany to get her second edition published the same year. And in the preface, she says that she was done wrong by those publishers. They left things out. They put things in that she didn't want. So our edition is obviously superior. But just so be careful if you do look that up online and you're not using ours, make sure it's the right number of pages. And then the family history recipes, like I said, they're on our blog. So you could look those up as well. And those are fabulous. The Lucretia's spinach dip was a family history recipe. So there's definitely lots of good ones out there.
There are 5 recipes handouts.
Mhm.
Okay.
And the 2 things that were made, the recipes for those.
Yeah, I know an old colonial historian who may be interested in some of these.
Yeah, who's
Professor Kim. Something about Kim,
oh, yes, I have heard that name. Yes.
your friend and colleague.
Oh, fabulous.
And he lives in Eastern Massachusetts now, but we still correspond.
Okay, wonderful.
So I was gonna send him some of this.
Oh, I bet he's gonna love it.
See, he would know what a flow oven was.
Yes, he would know what a flow.
My grandmother probably what it was because we were told that when she cooked on a wood stove in eastern Pennsylvania in coal country, she used to be able to tell temperature was right just by putting her hand in the oven as to whether or not it was at the right temperature to cook whatever she was going to cook.
Jim's the first one to
Sorry.
get into.
Oh.
There's some jam to put on the top of it too.
Oh,
So if you've ever enjoyed peanut butter and jelly, I think that might do the trick.
One of the challenges of replicating old recipes, especially the older they are, the ingredients, it's the quality of ingredients. Because what we have today is, rose water might not be what they used to.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, we-
process, chemically,
We try to be, we're all amateurs at this. We tried our best. Like I said, I helped that one chef sort of research to know at least what kind of lettuce to use. So we follow the recipes as closely and as honestly as we can, like that cornmeal fiasco. He used what he thought was the right ingredient. And he's normally a good cook, so it's a failure of understanding. But how would we have known that if we hadn't made it? So my participants, everybody who participates in this comes from the staff of the library, the archive, or the museum. Everybody volunteers, even the people who share their faces. It's a volunteer situation. So it's that tasting day. It's sort of like a historical potluck. It happens all at once. It's then we learn about the failures. The chefs share their stories. That's why we enjoy this project so much. Not only do we get to share our love of history with everybody else, but we get to learn too. So yeah, you're not wrong. That rose water, definitely more potent now. And now we know. I don't know what we would cut it with, but anybody else, any comments, questions? Yeah.
So are you calling it tasting history because of the guy on YouTube? Or?
No.
Okay.
I only learned about I do watch a lot of, like, I love Townsend's, which is 18th century cooking. I love Great Depression cooking with Clara. That's a fabulous channel. But tasting history with Max Miller was one I learned about after the fact. We were actually eating the lima bean croquettes, and there was like about 10 of us, and Tom Riller, retired state archivist, sort of floated that particular one. We were trying different titles, and he thought that one was the most appropriate. Thankfully, Tasting History with Max Miller is his full trademark, so we can get away with tasting history at State Library.
I just think it'd be great to share with, because he does he does take episodes.
Yeah.
Like historians give him things to do for episodes, and I just think this is fantastic.
I would love to do that. Also, if I were to reach out to him, I have a small correction for him to make, because he did an Amelia Simmons recipe and he got a little factor out or wrong. So, just friendly historian correction. But no, he's fabulous. I made another program based on tasting history for librarians to bring tasting history to their libraries as part of programming, public programming. And for teenagers, I suggested watching one of his videos. He does a great one on the Boston brown bread, and he talks about the molasses flood in Boston, which was tragic. People did die. I know that sounds ridiculous because it was slow moving, but people did pass. But Boston brown bread, you can just buy in a can. It's next to like the Bush's baked beans in the store. So it's very accessible for people to try. But yeah, I've definitely referenced him, and B. Dylan Hollis. He's on TikTok and YouTube. He does a lot of these as well. He has a cookbook called Baking Yesteryear, which is fabulous. B. Dylan Hollis, Hollis.
My kid is like 14 and he loves Max Miller, so I'm like, oh, this is
Just a
great.
note about B. Dylan. Some of his humor is a little mature or off color, mostly innuendo. I just want to put that out there. Your 14-year-old, he may or may not get the jokes. It's a little disclaimer.
That's great.
Thank you.
Could I get you to try one of those?
Oh, 100%. I want to try that salad. I've learned my lesson about Jell-O salads. You don't knock them till you try them, but when they're bad,
It's made with ginger ale.
how bad could it be?
Well, I don't know. I went shopping for this. And my wife said, we have to have some just plain gelatin.
Mhm.
She goes, go for the orange package. It's got 3 of them in it. Just buy one of the 3. So I go there and there are these little tiny packages. So I bought her 3. She goes, no, honey, there's 3 in each of these.
Oh, goodness.
So you all come over like this week. We're having a lot of salads this week.
You could do something in aspic.
Well, I've had some of that.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Should I stop
Yeah,
this?
please.
Is it stop share or?
Stop. Yep.
I like something.
Stop recording.